I never meant to stay in Larkspur Creek longer than it took to water my horse. That was the plan I'd carried out of Nebraska with nothing else worth carrying. A saddle, $30, and a particular kind of tired that doesn't come from riding but from having nowhere in particular to ride to. I didn't know yet that the woman drawing water at the well on the Doyle place would change that plan before sundown, or that by the time I understood why, it would already be too late to leave the way I'd planned to. Kansas, 1885. I'd been 3 days out from Ellsworth, following word of ranch work that never quite existed by the time I got to where it was supposed to be. The Doyle spread sat at the end of a rutted lane, 40 acres of good bottomland with a spring-fed well that hadn't gone dry even in the drought summer of '83. I'd hear that detail later, and it would matter more than I understood at the time. If I didn't find honest work inside 2 weeks, I'd be down to my last $4 and sleeping under whatever roof the weather allowed. That was stakes enough for most men. I didn't yet know they were about to become someone else's stakes too, a woman's land, and whether she got to keep it. She was standing at the pump when I rode up, working the handle with both hands, and the thing screamed with every stroke. Rusted iron complaining against iron, a sound that set my teeth on edge before I'd said a word to her. She didn't stop pumping to look at me. She finished filling her bucket first, set it down, and only then turned around with the particular unhurried attention of a woman who has decided a stranger can wait until she's ready for him. "You're not from Bramwell's outfit," she said. Not a question.
But you don't.
"No, ma'am. Name's Ethan Cole.
And that's your mistake.
I'm looking for work." "Everybody's looking for work." She studied me the way you'd study a horse you were thinking of buying. Teeth, legs, temperament. "Come inside. I have a proposition that isn't work, exactly, though it'll feel like it before we're through." Her name was Clara Doyle. Her husband Thomas had died in February, riding 11 miles into a blizzard to fetch the doctor for a fever that turned out to be his own and not the one he'd gone to treat. A detail she told me flat, without asking for sympathy, the way you'd report weather that had already passed. He'd left her 40 acres, 6 milk cows, the well that never went dry, and a note at the Larkspur Prairie Trust for $210, due each March at 8%, co-signed by nobody, because in Kansas in 1885 a married woman didn't sign her own bank paper, her husband did, and when he was gone, the law didn't quite know what to do with a widow who wanted to keep what was hers. The bank's president, a man named Silas Bramwell, had made it plain he'd extend no new terms to a woman working land alone. He would, however, be glad to buy the place outright, cash on the courthouse steps if it came to that. He'd made the offer 3 times since the funeral, each time a little softer in tone and a little harder in meaning. Thomas's father had proved up the original claim under the Homestead Act back in '71. 160 acres at the start, 5 years of fencing and breaking ground before the government would call it truly his, though the family had sold off all but the 40 that mattered most, the 40 with the spring under it. That was the boundary line Bramwell's survey talk had touched, though I didn't know that piece of it yet, sitting at that kitchen table with a stranger's ledger open in front of me. "I need a name on the refinancing papers," Clara said, the ledger open on the table between us like a hand of cards she'd already decided to play. "A husband's name, that's all the law asks for. Not that he farms, not that he loves me, just that he signs where the bank tells him to sign. In return, you'd have a roof, food, $20 a month once the note's settled, and a share if the herd grows. I'm not asking you to want this, Mr. Cole. I'm asking if you'll do it." I turned my hat in my hands the way a man does when he's buying time he doesn't have. "You don't know anything about me." "I know you took your hat off before I'd finished talking," she said. "The last man who sat where you're sitting didn't manage that. There were others. 2. One laughed, the other one didn't laugh, which I liked less. She closed the ledger. "You have until morning." I said yes before sunrise, before I'd fully understood why I was saying it. Only that something in me, the part that had spent 9 years sleeping in other men's bunkhouses and working ground I'd never own a blade of grass on, wanted, for once, to drive a nail into something that would still be standing in the morning with my name somewhere near it. We were married on a Thursday by a circuit preacher who charged 50 cents and didn't ask questions he didn't need answered. Riding back from town, I watched a rider on the ridge above the east pasture turn his horse the moment we came into view, the same careful, unhurried retreat of a man who has learned something and hasn't decided yet what to do with it. I'd find out soon enough it was one of Bramwell's riders, I didn't say anything to Clara. Not yet. Some things you carry alone a while before you hand them to somebody who's already carrying enough of her own. The work itself was plain. Fences needing wire, cattle needing moving, the well Clara drew from every morning before light, the handle still screaming its rusted complaint into the cold dark. I oiled the joint myself one evening without telling her, working axle grease into the pivot until the screech dropped to something almost quiet. She noticed the difference the next morning, standing at the pump a moment longer than she needed to. She didn't say anything about it. That was how the first weeks went between us, neither of us naming the things we noticed, both of us noticing everything there was. It was in her husband's ledger, 3 weeks in, mending a page that had come loose at the spine, that I found the note in Thomas Doyle's own hand, dated the January before he died. Bramwell asked again about the spring water, told him no. Says the original 71 claim filing has an error on the western line. Check with the county recorder before signing anything with him. Thomas had never checked. Whatever he'd meant to do about it, the fever had taken the chance from him before he could. I didn't tell Clara that night or the next. Not because I was keeping a secret the way a man keeps something shameful, but because I didn't yet know if it was a threat worth her fear or nothing at all. And I'd learnt the hard way, somewhere in 9 years of other men's land, that handing a person fear before you can hand them an answer alongside it is its own kind of cruelty. I wrote a letter to the county recorder in Ellsworth that same night and said nothing to her about it. Before I go on, I want to step outside the story for just a moment. If you're driving right now, or cooking supper, or sitting somewhere quiet with this playing low in the background, thank you for spending this evening with Clara and me. If this story has found any kind of place in you, I'd be grateful if you'd leave a like and hit subscribe before you go on your way tonight. It helps more than you'd think, and it means there's another story waiting for you next week. Now, back to Kansas, because Silas Bramwell is about to make his move, and the water underneath that land is about to matter more than either of us had let ourselves believe. Bramwell came by the east fence himself in April, sitting his horse with the particular stillness of a man who has never once in his life had to raise his voice to get what he wanted from someone. Heard the widow Doyle found herself a husband, he said. Convenient timing, with the note coming due next month. Convenience one word for it, I said, and kept driving the post I was working. That western line's always been a little uncertain, out past the spring. He said it like a man dropping a stone down a well to measure how deep the water ran. The 71 survey, recorder's office might find some irregularities. Somebody ever thought to look close at it. He rode off without waiting on an answer, which told me everything his careful words hadn't said outright. I told Clara that night, sitting across the kitchen table with the lamp burning low between us. About the note in Thomas's hand, about Bramwell at the fence, about the letter already sent off to Ellsworth 3 weeks past. She was quiet a long while, turning her coffee cup slowly on its saucer. You've known for 3 weeks, she said. It wasn't quite an accusation, more a fact she was setting down carefully, the way she set down everything that mattered to her. I didn't want to hand you a fear I couldn't hand you an answer for in the same breath. She looked at me the way she'd looked at me that first afternoon at the well. Assessing, recalculating something she'd already decided about me once. Thomas would have told me the day he found it, whether he had an answer or not. I'm not Thomas, I said, and it came out harder than I'd meant it to, though not unkind. I don't rightly know how to carry a thing halfway, Clara, never learned how. I hadn't meant to say the next part, but it came anyway. My own father died alone on a ranch in Nebraska while I was 3 states off chasing a wage that didn't matter half as much as I thought it did. Nobody sent word until it was 6 weeks past too late for me to do a single thing about it. I've been careful with hard news ever since. Maybe too careful, I don't rightly know the difference some days. Something crossed her face then that I couldn't put a name to. Not anger exactly, and not forgiveness either. She closed the ledger and didn't open it again for the rest of that night, and neither of us said much else before the lamp went out. The recorder's reply came in May, carried out from Ellsworth by a surveyor named Pruitt, who spent 2 full days walking the western line with his transit and his chains, while I held stakes for him and asked more questions than I likely had any right to ask a man doing his job. The 71 survey had drifted, a compass error, 60 feet east of where the original claim marker had actually been driven into the ground 14 years before. 60 feet that put the spring, the one that had never gone dry even through the drought of '83, squarely and unambiguously inside Doyle land. Bramwell had known that for years, most likely, and said nothing about it, waiting patiently for exactly the kind of vulnerable moment a widow alone represented to a man with his particular patience. The corrected filing went into the recorder's office on a Tuesday afternoon. On Thursday night, somebody put a rock through the henhouse window and left 3 head of Bramwell's cattle grazing loose in our north pasture, a mess deliberate enough to invite a dispute about whose stock belonged where, murky enough to keep a county lawyer occupied clear through the summer if we'd let it sit unanswered. Clara was already dressed and out the door before I'd finished pulling on my second boot. "They're my hens," she said, when I told her she didn't have to come out in the dark with me. She was already moving toward the barn. We drove the strays back before dawn without exchanging more than a dozen words between us, and somewhere in that grey hour before sunrise, working side by side at the same stretch of fence we'd already rebuilt twice that spring, I understood plainly that I had stopped thinking of this as an arrangement sometime back in April, and simply hadn't gotten around to telling her so. The same quiet way she hadn't told me when the pump handle stopped screaming under her hands each morning. Bramwell came once more, in June, this time to the front porch itself, hat in his hand, wearing the particular humility of a man who has run entirely out of other approaches worth trying. "The survey stands," he said. "I won't pretend to you I'm glad of it." "You knew for years," I said. "You'd have let her lose the land over 60 feet you already knew good and well was hers to begin with." He didn't answer that directly, not in words. He looked past me at Clara standing in the doorway, and something moved across his face that conceded what his mouth wouldn't. He rode off down the lane, and Larkspur Creek didn't see much more of Silas Bramwell after that particular afternoon. There'd been a night in July, mending fence past dark because the moon was bright enough to work by, when she'd handed me a cup of coffee, and our hands had stayed a moment too long on the same tin cup, and I'd started to say something I'd been carrying since April, and gotten as far as her name before a rider passed on the road below, slow and deliberate in the dark, and the moment closed itself up as quick as it had opened. She stepped back. I picked the fence tool back up. Neither of us mentioned it again, though I thought about that unfinished sentence more nights than I'd have admitted to anyone, including myself. It was August before I finally said the thing I'd been carrying quietly since April. We were at the well at dusk, and I was working the handle for her the way I'd taken to doing without either of us ever naming it out loud, and the water came up clean and easy and entirely silent now. "The terms were written for a year," I said. "That's not until October. I know full well when the terms end, Ethan. I don't want to wait until October to tell you I don't want them to end at all." I looked down at the bucket instead of at her, because looking at her while I said it was more than I'd worked up the nerve for just yet. "I came here for $20 a month and a roof over my head. I'm not leaving now for any amount of money there is in the whole state of Kansas." She was quiet long enough that I started to think I'd misjudged the whole thing entirely, standing there like a fool with an empty bucket in my hand. Then she said, "I stopped needing a signature on a piece of paper somewhere around the night you fixed that pump and never once told me you'd done it. I just didn't rightly know how to say so myself. I set the bucket down in the dirt." She crossed the small space between us the way a person crosses a room they've been standing carefully at the edge of for months on end, and there wasn't a single businesslike thing left standing in either one of us by the time she reached me. We were married a second time that October, properly, in front of the whole of Larkspur Creek, though only the two of us understood it was really the same marriage finally catching up with itself. Clara wore her mother's dress, brought west in a trunk years before. I wore a shirt she'd sewn herself, sitting up 2 nights by lamplight at that same kitchen table, though she never once mentioned she'd made it. I found the thimble marks worked faint into the collar seam and understood well enough on my own. The well still stands at the center of that yard today. The handle turns smooth and near silent now, the way it always should have turned. And some mornings, watching her draw water up in the grey early light before the rest of the world is awake, I find myself thinking about the sound that pump used to make, and how a man can spend 9 long years listening for something without ever once knowing what it was he was listening for, and then hear it, all at once, arrive in the particular silence where a scream used to be. Thank you for sitting with me a while by this story tonight. Wherever you're listening from, I'm grateful you stayed until the end of it, until the next story finds you.